Welcome to the Insider Safe Place for Men podcast show. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. All right. Happy Friday, everyone. All right, guys out there, how are you doing? All right. Welcome once again to the Insider Safe Place for Men. Here we are, podcast. All right. So the wind's blowing a little bit out there. And it's still hot here in Sacramento, California. I have this little squirrel. And you guys remember I keep telling you about the squirrels, right? So usually, of course, they're eating up all my stuff, my little garden stuff in the back, but the sun is kind of, and the heat has kind of pretty much wiped everything out. And so, we'll start again. Well, the second crop, I'll call it, in the end of July. So here in a couple of weeks, we'll start replanting stuff. And usually, there's enough heat to get us through whatever October. And so, have some more, we'll have some tomatoes and different things, but it won't be as hot, so they'll probably survive. But anyway, so I got this little squirrel, out in the back, and it's so hot, right? You see the birds and stuff, and what they do is they try and get the water out of the little, sprinkler systems or irrigation systems that you have that might be dripping a little bit. And I was like, oh, this is just so hot for these guys. And so I went out in the back and I put a little tray of like just some cool water out there, and so the squirrel comes down and he drinks the water, and then he just spreads himself out. So like he gets on like all fours, you see like those flying squirrels. So he just spreads himself out under the tree in the shade, and he just enjoys this little time. So that's how hot it is. Even the little animals and stuff are just spreading themselves out, trying to keep themselves cool there in the shade. All right, guys, how are you doing? Hey, it's another session that we have an opportunity to just talk, to just share kind of what's on our mind. I'm going to share a few things that I haven't actually shared before. I've done workshops actually with military where we had everyone that was there was actually from the military, had some type of service or armed service. I'm going to say that took place, abuse that took place. And so I'm going to share with you a few stories. I want to honor a couple of the guys we've had. One that passed away, is no longer with us, transition it, as we call it, rest in power. And so I just wanted to share a couple of those stories kind of in memory. And then also just kind of a way of sharing their story to, it keeps them living. In other words, when you hear someone else's story and you have an opportunity, and maybe you can relate to in some way, and maybe it helps you on your journey, that hopefully that person continues to live on through that, right? And so story is really, really important. And you're going to be finding some of these also. So those of you that know that September, so we had to push it out a little bit, but September is going to be the launch date of the Safe Place for Men digital magazine. And we'll be having stories like this in there. We have different articles. We have male survivors that will be writing articles and contributing. And so the whole idea of this, it's a digital magazine. So it's for male survivors by male survivors. So I think it's unique for us to have a space and a place, where we can share what's going on with us, things that have helped us to work through different issues, but places where it's survivors, where we're sharing our stories. And so those that will be some of the contributors that are writing, they will be individuals who have experienced sexual abuse. And I think that's really important. So we'll be hitting some of those things. So for some of you that are doing the coaching program, hey, welcome aboard. It's great to have you aboard. Can't wait when we get to do some of our workshop meetings together. That's great. Like I said, if that's something that you're interested in, you want to move to the next realm. So like I said, maybe you've been doing, therapy for a little bit and it's taking you some places, but you want to go further. In other words, you want to get rid of a lot of dysfunctional, I'm going to say, behavior and thinking that's holding you down. And it's interesting when we get together and we talk about these things and now say, hey, how has, the sexual abuse, affected you today in your life, right? And so we kind of have this chart, this gamut chart, and people say, yeah, man, it's just been hard for me to, really hold a job or to have confidence actually in my job. And so you'll hear things like that, or you'll hear guys say, yeah, my relationships, all my relationships are just kind of wonky. And it's cool when we're doing that and we're doing the coaching, because those are the things when we think about life that often are really important to us. And so what's cool about the coaching is like, not only are we just working on the sexual abuse issues, but how they touch these different pieces of our life. And then what are things that we can actually do to work through that. And so for those of you that are, welcome, great treat coming along, especially once you see the chart. So we're going to do the 15-step chart, because you guys know I'm about measuring. That's how we determine we're healing in our healing vision. And so we're going to be talking about those 15 steps, and we'll talk about each one. And what's so cool about it is then you get to see where you're at. And that's what I love it. That's what I love about it, is that you have an opportunity through these 15 steps, whatever that we're moving to, or maybe not even steps. We can even call them, phases, levels, whatever. And there can be more, but these are our general ones that I've noticed over my 20 years of working with male survivors that often we hit, right? And so the steps like, okay, what happens? This occurs. And then what do? We try to do some soothing emotional pain or something like that. And we compartmentalize over here. And then we get to this point where we're seeking help, but so all the different steps are just kind of laid out there. And that's what's so great, is when you get to see this chart, you kind of get to plot yourself there and say, oh, okay, this helps me to realize this is kind of where I'm at right now. And so we get to look back and see, okay, this phase right here. So was there anything for me in that phase there? Or maybe I haven't hit it, right? And so that's the thing about phases. They never, of course, come in order. So that's great. So anyway, like as I was saying, the digital magazine is actually coming out. So if you want to subscribe now. It'll be coming out in September, so it will be delivered to you digitally. I'm actually going around and doing some interviews. And so you guys know I love, hanging out with male survivors and talking and sharing and just hearing their stories and perspectives. So I get to do that for the magazine. And then the other thing that's new on the horizon here is, here's the thing. When you put in the work and you do the work and you're genuine about the work, people realize it. So I was approached by a organization that works with survivors. And so the organization's like, hey, we want you to help us. We want you to help us to build some programs, because we notice, some of the programs and things that you've built over the years, and they have been quite effective. And so for the next, maybe half a year to year, be stepping into a role in helping some other organizations actually build some of their male survivor programs, right? And you guys know me, but, of course, as a coach, right, it's always, visualization, actualization, manifesting your dreams. But what's so cool about this is, this is one of my passions, and it's so great when you, when you put the fear aside and you step out and you just start to do. And that's the place that a lot of us as survivors are. We're afraid. And you guys remember what I said before. one of the things about this journey is you cannot be afraid to ask, because you just never know the answer that you're going to receive, that you're going to get. And so many times as survivors, I'm going to say, because of the sexual abuse, or because we have this limiting mindset, right? Limiting beliefs that it can't be done. There's no way, I'm going to figure out how to do it, or if I can afford this or whatever. I scratched that mentality long time ago. And my mom used to always have this saying. She would just say, you just never know until you ask, because that might be the day when you ask that question, that something has, hit that person's heart, whatever, and they really want to help you. And they might even just give it to you for free, but you never know until you ask. And even if you don't get the answer that you want at that time and date, you don't give up, right? Because out there in the universe, it's conspiring to help you, but you have to be willing to step out. Ooh, all right, we can end. Thanks, Mom. So for us as survivors, as we're working through the steps, decide today that you're not going to take no for an answer, right? When it comes to your healing, that you're going to ask. I'm always asking, right? Especially when I look at something, I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. And I'll go back and say, okay, are there some options here? Can we do it this way? Can we do it this way? Would you be comfortable? Right? Because you never know, you ask. And so many doors have opened for me because I didn't just say, okay, it's the no. It's like, all right, is there another possible way that we can do this? So don't be afraid to ask. All right, that's enough of that. All right, so like I said, we kind of lost a survivor here who's no longer with us. And I just want to share some pieces of their stories, actually. And like I said, for those that, like I said, when did we do this workshop retreat? It's been several years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But the unique thing about this one was we happened to have what I call a band of brothers. So all these guys were part of the military, right? And so this is where their sexual abuse had taken place. So it was kind of unique because it was this place where not only were the men in this group all experience unwanted sexual abuse, but they all just happen to also be military and where it occurred. So just want to share some of those. So the first person I'm going to just share with you is Jay. And so I remember when he was sitting there in the workshop, one of the phrases as he was telling the story was that he was thinking in his mind that no one will believe you. And that's because this is actually what he was kind of being told by his drill sergeant. And this was boot camp because this is when it happened. So I remember Jay, and he was sitting there and he was telling the story. And he was telling the story how it was like early in the morning, and he was in his sergeant's office, and as he was recalling, and he was just talking about kind of the brutality, of it, that his drill sergeant he was only 18 years old, right? And so he's on this journey kind of to find himself. But what had happened was the drill sergeant, was kind of choking him, and he was sexually abusing him there, even though there were just recruits sleeping over in the next room. And I remember when he shared this story, because he said this story had happened to him in the 60s. And I'm like, wow, I hadn't even, I'm not even born yet. I haven't been born yet. And because oftentimes we think that when we talk about sexual abuse for men, that it's a kind of a new thing, because of Me Too. And actually, it's not. And he shared for him this sense of like he felt that there was no justice because there was no military response or, whatever prevention program. Of course, during that time as there is today. So those of you that have heard Mike Cochran, and so you guys know that he does this work and he helps men that are there in the military as he's doing the training. But during that time, there were no protections. There were no protections for, these recruits. And then he would talk about, the kind of the paradigm of, and he's like, and during that time, he says it didn't matter if someone had sexually abused you, right? Everyone would think of it as being gay, and it's like that was just like forbidden in the ranks because it was actually seen as a national security threat. And so think about him living with this in this place. He's here to serve his country, and he's been raped. He's been raped by his drill sergeant. And I remember him saying, he said that, if you came forward and if you said that you were raped, people would have thought that you were, and these words, he said they would think that you were a child molester. They would think that you were queer. And then he said you would be treated as if it was your fault. Well, we still have a lot of essence of that, but he said during his time, then that was kind of one of the main prevalent thoughts. And I remember him sharing as he was sitting there and talking, and he was talking about, after the attack, he was just talking about the way that he felt, right? And he says, I didn't know what to do. He says, I just went and I took a shower. And then what I did was I went back to bed. Now, the thing about this for Jay was that the sergeant actually raped him several times, right? And this was, of course, during basic training. And he said that each time he stayed quiet about it because he was determined to make it through boot camp. Now, I want you to see the resiliency. Now, here's the thing, though, and remember, this is always important. Remember, our brains, at least for men, when we look at the neuroscience, is not considered to be fully developed until we're age 25. So there's some of us out there, when we look at, hindsight, and we say, oh, my abuse took place at 17 or 18, so, it shouldn't be that bad because it happened, at that stage of life. I was past what we might consider, teenage, or I was considered, whatever, a young man. But remember, from a neuroscience perspective, your brain is still dealing with things and trying to grow and form and develop until age 25. And oftentimes we don't think of it from that perspective. With that, I'm going to say 20/20 hindsight, and we go back and we lay on all this guilt and stuff. Well, why didn't I do this? And I'm going to say it would be no different than if you were 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, and the abuse happens. Your mind is still developing. So anyway, he just shared and he talked about, he wanted to make it through boot camp, so he didn't say anything. But what happened was when he graduated, then what he did, he actually reported. He reported what had happened. And he was hoping and he was expecting that they were going to actually, jail, do some type of whatever trial for his, attacker, and to start, an investigation. And you could see him here as he was talking. I mean, you could feel the anger in his voice. And here it was like decades later, because he said, no one ever called me. Nothing was ever said, and nothing was ever done. And so what happened was he became the scapegoat. So instead of his chain of command, doing something about it, what happened is they just started to complain about his performance. And so one of the reasons they were complaining, though, about his performance is because the sexual abuse actually physically damaged him, raped him. So he was having some kidney issues, torn rectum. And so he was missing quite a bit of training because he was getting treatment for the stuff that was going on. And Yeah, can you imagine that? Now I know some of you guys, you might be triggered. So, like I said, if you need to stop, whatever, move to a different place, whatever happy place, that's fine. But I want to share Jay's story, and so that was what was going on, for Jay. Whew. So I just want you to, I want to share that because Jay, I just want to let you know that your story is out there. Your story right now is being heard. There are other men out there, and you know that because of the workshop that have experienced something like this. And I'm hoping, Jay, that just sharing just those small pieces might inform those other men that there's other men out there that have experienced this. And I hope that it will give them the courage also to step forward. I remember one thing that Jay said, and he was talking about when he was 18, because his idea was to kind of make this a career for the armed services. And he said he thought that he had a future. He really wanted to serve his country, and he's like, yeah, I was good at it. He's like, I knew I could be good at it. But he says, with the sexual abuse, he says, all that was taken away from me. All right. So in honor of Jay, let's share that story. Peter. I'm going to talk a little bit about Peter. I remember when he came to the workshop, and he started sharing pieces of his story, and once again, he was enlisted in the Army, and I think I can't remember how old he was. I'll have to try to remember his story as he was telling it here, but I remember him saying what triggered it for him, and this is why it's important to really understand how the abuse has affected us. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it isn't, but he shared the story for him, because oftentimes I'll ask people, what brought you here? What brought you to this workshop retreat? And so he shared the story that one day he was walking through a store, through a supermarket, and he was looking for an item. And he said what happened is he stopped by because there was like this whatever Febreze, whatever aisle or something like that. And so he stopped by just to smell some of the scents on the shelf. And then he said before he knew it, he was on the floor and he was just holding his hands over his face and he was sobbing. And he said it was because one of the scents that he smelled, it was like the soap or whatever that they had been using in the shower at the Army during his basic training. And it was in that shower where he was beaten and he was raped by another recruit. And so just that one scent, that one smell brought all those things back to him. So this is one of the reasons I'm going to keep sharing the story, but here's one of the reasons, guys. And so those of you that are working and coaching with me, this is one of the reasons that when I work with you, I'm teaching you different techniques on how to handle some of these things when they come up. The ants. So for those of you that are doing the coaching course, the ants, right? And because what happens is our brains are just wonderfully made, created, engineering feats. And when a simple smell or word or something comes across and we haven't really processed it, it can take us right back to that exact time and moment. And we have all those feelings just come flooding to us. We haven't had a chance to process them. Remember, we talked about fragmented memory in podcasts way before. And so then when you don't have any skills to actually help you work through that or strategies, it can be devastating. And so I remember him, saying, as he was sitting there and he was talking, he's like, this was just a little thing. He's like, how could this be? Here it is. I'm in this store, and now the scent just takes me back to this little square shower. And he kind of described the shower, and he said, it's hell. He's like, it's like there was no escape from it. So when Peter shared the story, I think he said he was around 17 years old. And so once again, right? And so we think that because, oh, well, it happened, later in life, it's not, that's not, we don't really consider it, childhood sexual, but you know what, 17, you're still a child. Your brain hasn't fully developed or matured. And so there he was assaulted, in the shower. And once again, it was in the evening. Everyone else had gone to bed. And just like Jay, he didn't tell anyone. And so like him, he ends up in the hospital. The next day, he's internally bleeding from a torn rectum, right? And so, of course, the doctors asked him what happened. And what was interesting was when Peter shared, he shared about his spiritual faith. And so I think he said he was Mormon, or that was the religious faith, whatever that he practiced. And he said, he says, I really couldn't say anything. He said it was kind of like my spiritual practice was even halting me from even telling the truth of what had happened to me, because in my world, in my group, right, this would just be total taboo, even though I was the one who was victimized. And so he says, I felt like I just couldn't say anything because it would look like I was a total failure to my family, to myself, to my spiritual practice, to my, platoon. And it's interesting because, now I'm going to say today there's a little bit more, because there's a little bit more awareness in the armed services. But I think I was doing the research and he was giving me the time period. And like during that time period, I think it was 3% of male victims actually reported the sexual assaults. And I think that was by the DOD, the Defense Department. And so that was the percentage. They said they think it's double increase. So I guess that would be 6%, which isn't a lot, but it's in, people are starting to come forward a little bit more. And it's interesting as you would hear, Peter, and once again, just like Jay, this was kind of the career that he wanted. And, he was really good. He was a really good marksman, physical fitness, and he wanted to make the military a career. But as he was sitting there explaining it, he says, I think I can relate a little bit, he says, to those men that were in Vietnam, and when they came back home, they kind of felt like they were rejected, even though they were, serving their country, and whether people agreed with the war. And he said, it kind of felt the same way. He said, I had a sense of betrayal and disgust, right? And from being abused, being raped at a place that I had come to try and serve my country. And then so for Peter, eventually for him, he was discharged. He was discharged for conduct. So, but think about that, right? So once again, here you have this brain of yours hasn't been fully developed, is trying to figure out how to cope. So we know some of the coping mechanisms, that happen when sexual abuse happens years later, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with it. And I remember him saying that when he returned home, he said that he couldn't tell anyone about the attack, right? he said that for him, he stopped going to church, and he said that he just started falling into his dysfunctional behaviors to deal with the pain. So drinking, he talked about struggling with, holding a job. He talked about questioning his own sexuality, and, and then the people around him are just wondering, well, why can't you keep your act together? Why can't you get your act together? And I remember him saying it took 10 years for him to decide to actually tell them what happened. And he says it was that time that he felt that he broke. So, Peter, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for allowing us to hear pieces of your story. Once again, for those out there, and for us, here in the States, I know we have, international listeners, but for us here in the States, of course, July 4th, for many is Independence Day here. And so these are the things often people think about, the wars and those that actually, fought in the war for independence. And so I just wanted to take some time to share some of those stories of survivors. And I believe by sharing just pieces of their story, that in some way it allows them, I'm going to say, a bit of justice. There's one thing, when I'm working, and coaching survivors, and we do want a sense of justice, whatever that looks like. For some people, that's, being able to actually, charge the perpetrator, the abuser in court and law. For some people, it's whatever, outing the person. But then for some people, justice is having their story shared. And what that means is that the individual didn't get away with it totally, because the story is out there and they have an opportunity to share what happened with them and what they experienced. And that's one of the reasons I love doing the workshop retreats, because it's just a wonderful, safe place where you're not judged. You can share your story and you're believed. And there's just something in the power of knowing that someone believes your story. So to all the armed service men out there, where maybe this is part of your story, first of all, thank you for your service. And I know we always say that, but yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your service. But once again, know that you are not alone. And I just want you to realize that you don't have to sit there alone. If there is a place, there's a safe place. That's why we're here. And so maybe you're listening, and maybe Jay's story or Peter's story is a story that you can relate to. There's a place to heal. You know what? Take the first step. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need. Right? I started out the show with that. That was kind of my mom saying, don't be afraid to ask, because you never know what the answer is going to be. If you just automatically start out with the no, it's like, oh, there's no way I can do that, whatever. Well, you've already limited yourself. And yeah, your answer will be no. But if you're like, there might be a possibility. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask for some flexibility. I'm going to ask for a little bit of compassion and grace. And hey, can we work this out, whatever, this way? Because I really need this. Don't be afraid to ask. All right, guys. So that is a wrap for this podcast here today. Thank you so much, guys, for just allowing me to share this, or to share these pieces. It was really important for me. Rest in peace, Jay. Rest in peace, Peter. I'm just so glad that you had an opportunity to actually come to the workshop to share some of your story and just to coach and to work with you. And, you know, as we talk about those 15 phases or steps, and one of them is the phase, and that's never the last phase because we're always, you know, in and out, but it's called truly living. And I believe for those guys, when they came and they did the work, that it gave them an opportunity to really, truly begin living their life. All right, guys. So until our next Safe Place for Men podcast, be safe.